Hello, I've just read chapter 29 of Coruscant Nights, Jedi Twilight. Cared? We'll just pick up where, at the start of the chapter, like we always do. So, we pick up with Jackson I5, who are looking at the PCBU above them. And Jax tries to connect to the Force. And again, he's like earlier in the book, his connection falters. He feels nothing, and it takes him by surprise. And he remembers that back at the Connacht when the stormtroopers were looking for him and Nick rescued him, a similar thing happened. He just couldn't connect to the Force. He just disappeared from him for a moment. And thinks, well, it came back once and it'll come back again. And so he shoves I5 into the driver's position and just tells him to drive forward. And so they do that, and the pilot of the PCBU, the droid pilot, he's trying to line up a shot and not miss, so this takes him by surprise. And then Jax, as they go under the PCBU, Jax ignites his lightsaber and swings at them, the PCBU, and it damages it, and when Jackson I5 stop at on the other side of the PCBU. The PCBU crashes. It took speed up. That's it, and I'm fairly sure it's was it then that Jax starts speeding the Force again, or was it after? No, it was after, wasn't it? Uh, I'm trying to. I'm fairly sure it says it does come back to Jax. Yeah, it comes back after they take out the droid's pilot to survive the crash, and Jax is about to reignite his lightsaber to take it on, and I5 just says to let him handle it, and he shoots at the droid, and the droid just the shot goes through his eye, and he just collapses. And Jax just says to I5 to not expect his gratitude, and I5 says that he wouldn't dream of it, and Jax says that he doesn't thank nav computers. And I5 says, well, maybe if you did, you'd get where you wanted to go faster. And that's when Jax feels the Force come back, and he checks in on Narunt, and Narunt says that I5 that Den's a pretty good pilot, and Jax lowers his voice and turns away from I5 and says that I5 is as well. Um, he says that he's not bad in an emergency either, and I5 just says, I heard that. Then we pick up with Caird. Now, this is a bit I'm really going to struggle with explaining because I really struggle with this bit of the chapter. Pretty much, Caird is starting to really just get annoyed with his Kubar's disguise. He's 2 levels above she's all watching him. I know it's all that he's it's again reminded that he doesn't have to get the droid bug eyes. He doesn't have to get the droid, but he because that's what he said he didn't have to, but he could if he wanted to, and he's just thinking how to just get this over with. So you has a little poison dart launcher that can take out pretty much any humanoid species. So he lines up the shot and is about to fire when a Nug child bumps into Caird and he completely misses, and he draws Sheezel's attention. And a big fight comes out, and Caird just gets out his disguise after that. And the fight continues, and Sheezel eventually breaks away the thing that Caird is on, and Caird is able to grab a cable, and he swings over, sounds like other wires, again, this is a bit of the chapter that is, I'm struggling to follow what it's saying at that point. It's just a bit like, eh, what what are you saying? Also, this part of the chapter just before the fight, it pretty much just tells us what the environment is like twice in just different words, and it's like, okay, we know what this is after it tells us the second time. Like we get the impression of what it was the first time he told us. But anyway, then a carriage lands and hits Shizor in the chest, and they both are electrocuted. And Cade's unconscious for a second, and when he wakes up, he realises Shizor isn't there, but he sees Shizor beside him also being electrocuted and struggling to move. And Cade thinks that this is going to be a fight for the ages because, you know, they're all both struggling to move, and then Cade goes unconscious again. And then when he wakes up, he sees Shizor above him with arms crossed looking down at him. And what does he say? No, he doesn't say anything. Okay. And then he sees Shizor look ahead of him, and there's another dark figure coming towards Kurt, and it's a black droid with golden eyes. That is almost insectoid. He's got a couple antennas. I'll just read out the description. I went a few pages too far back. There we go. Cade focused on this new being, and that was a misnomer, because the figure was a droid. It looked something like a protocol droid. It was bipedal and humanoid in design. Its chassis was a glossy black. Save for the eyes, they were huge and insectile, spreading over much of its upper face, and golden in colour. From the temples sprouted two segmented antennae that rose about 10 meters above its head. The aspect of its appearance that Caird was most interested in, however, was the retractable energy cannon that had just emerged from its bay within the droid's left forearm. And that's when Caird realises this has to be the droid Bug Eyes. And Shizor gives Bug Eyes the order to shoot again. And Caird just wonders how is Shizor able to give this droid commands. And then the way the chapter ends, we're told that Caird is blasted away into the night. And that is and the end of that's why at the start of this video I was going, Caird? Because it was, again, I've been really interested in Caird's story. It's got, for the most part, it's nothing to do with the main plot of this book, but I've been really interested in it. And it was just, Caird, are you dead? I've checked Wikipedia. Apparently Caird isn't dead. No, there's going to be, and his storyline is going to continue, but it sounds like he's been killed. And it's just, oh. And I didn't go fully into detail on every specific detail with Caird in this chapter. This is one of the longer chapters in the book. Usually they're coming out in about 6 pages. I think this one was like 10. So it's a little bit long, or 8, you know, it was a little bit longer. It was a couple pages longer. So I didn't go fully into detail with Caird, but anyway, Jax. I'll start with Jax, given that one has the least really with this chapter. That's only like a page and a quarter. That's like only 2.25 pages long. Yeah, it's nice to kind of see him somewhat just being able to admit that, you know, I5 has its uses. You can kind of see him starting to warm up now. You know, he was hesitantly obliging I5 in the previous chapter. Now he's somewhat starting to warm up. Though he's still not being polite to I5. He really just, again, still is disregarding him as a machine, but admits that he has his uses in an emergency. So that's quite interesting to see. Another thing that's interesting is that, you know, he loses connection to the Force briefly again. And again, that was brought up earlier in the book, and so that's going to be interesting to see how that gets developed, or how that plays into certain situations, and what's causing it. It seems to be, you know, great stress or fear or when, because it always seems to be in an intense situation. It seems to just, when he's sure he's about to die, he loses his connection briefly. Previously, he was with the stormtroopers, he was sure he was going to die. Here, he's pretty sure he's going to die because, there's not really much else that they can do in the situation they were in. So it's not explicitly said he was sure he was going to die in this situation, but the situation they were in and how he felt like they already had very little options to get out of it, and how the option that they did wind up going with was a bit suicidal in itself. You can I think it's when he's in an almost guaranteed death situation, he loses his connection. So yeah, it's really interesting. With Caird, again, you just feel really bad for Caird. You just want him to get home. You really do. And we're told that this is the first time he's ever failed an assignment. He always succeeds, usually. And this is the first time he failed, and it's... I will say the Ugnaught bumping into Caird, it did feel a little bit forced, I'll be honest. It felt like it did feel a bit forced, just so that Caird, and just so Shizor could survive. It felt a bit forced. It is a random thing that, it could have happened, but it just feels so forced just to make sure that Shizor survives and that there's an actual fight that happens. I think that's like my only complaint with this chapter, is that the Ugnaught bumping into Caird feels forced. Caird missing, I feel like, would be more believable. Even though he's an experienced assassin and one of the best, well, he is said to have been the best, but that might have just been in Caird's mind. It's just, it still feels a little bit forced, the Ugnaught bumping into him. So, yeah, that's, and the fight between Caird and Shizor was a little bit hard to follow at times. I'll be honest. I think it just comes from, we're told about the environments, but we're not given enough details about what the environment is like, and we're not given enough... And there was one point too, so that Caird jumped to the floor, and I thought he had jumped from the balcony he was on to Shizor, to the two floors down to where Shizor was, but no, he just made a dive to the floor on the balcony he was on. So that was something that could have been made much more clear, because then it later brought up that he was still on the balcony, and that became relevant in the fight. And there were just certain bits, so it's... and again, the bits where the floor gives way from Shizor's fire, and he swings with the wires, etc. It really just can't feel like it came out of nowhere, and it was still a really big struggle to actually follow that bit of the fight. So yeah, at times it was just really difficult to follow. And little bits of it just did feel a bit forced, again, like with the Ugnaught. But overall, I think, again, Caird has been one of the best characters in the book. Funnily enough, I think Jackson have kind of been some of them the least developed characters in the book, which again is funny considering they're meant to be the main characters, particularly Jax, and all the other characters seem to have some really interesting development or something going for them. And this is from someone who really does enjoy, a Jedi Survivor post-Order 66 story. I really enjoy those stories, and I'm more interested in the other characters' storylines. So it's really funny. It's really funny. And I think, again, it just comes down to how the characters have been developed. Jackson, they have had some development, but I think, particularly with Jax, we haven't seen a lot of Larenth, so it's hard to judge her, but with Jax, particularly, because we did spend quite a bit of time with him initially, it just felt, initially, it was just, okay, we've seen what he thinks, but what is he like as a person? And it just took us so long to get to that is going to shadow Jax's character, that we didn't really quite know who he was at first. And that's going to shadow Jax's character, I think. And that's something that is going to be hard to properly acknowledge, and it's anytime there's going to be something new, it's, oh, here we go, Jackson's finally getting some more character, even though he has started to get a bit more character as we've gone on. You know, I think we do need to, that is something you need to acknowledge, but because there is that shadow of, well, he didn't have much of a character at first, that's going to shadow his character going forward, and that's something I think you need to, that has to be acknowledged, that it is going to shadow his character. But still, you know, anyway, yeah, it's just, again, with Caird, you just feel so bad for him, and I really am rooting for Caird. I really do hope he eventually is able to get home, but it doesn't sound like he will. But yeah, I think that brings an end to this review. I enjoyed this chapter. It's just some bits of it were a bit hard to follow at times. I think even the fight, even when Jax was striking at the PCBU, I was pretty much only able to gather that he was striking at the PCBU. I was able to gather that, but it's just the way it was being described, it was like, oh, what there? So yeah, but anyway, thank you all for watching, and goodbye. Hello everyone, I've just read chapter 30 of Coruscant Nights Jedi Twilight, and funnily enough it ends on page 230, and 31 of course will start on page 231, so you know, that's quite interesting. You know, quite a good, quite a coincidence. Anyway, we pick up with Zen, I5, Namath, Jax, who have all rendezvoused. And Jax says that they have to keep moving and that they can't just keep a low profile. It's going to be too hard to, and Namath agrees, saying that they can't just keep a low profile and look for bug eyes. It's going to be too, they can't do both, because of course, you know, they've got to find bug eyes before anyone else. And I5 says that he believes that, based on what Jax has said and, you know, what and stuff, he says that Vader must not just want Jax to eradicate the Order, he must want him for another reason. Well done. And Jax is getting a bit annoyed, but I5 doesn't really care, and he just asks if he's right, and Jax is about to say, none of your business, but Namath interrupts and says, it would seem so, but they don't know how or why. And I5 says that if it is true, and Jax is using the Force, in a high-profile way, Vader can pick up on it, and it doesn't exactly say this, but Vader will be able to sense where Jax is, and of course be able to find Bug Eyes. But as we know, Vader already knows where Bug Eyes is, but they don't know that. And then they hear a voice, Nick, and it turns out to be Nick Rostu. And he says that he's found Bug Eyes and he'll take them to them, and he brings up a story about how he was at the Imperial Palace, how he escaped, etc. And they go into a skimmer, and hold on, mate. Oh, when Rostu does appear, Jax introduces Nick to Lambert and Den, but he doesn't introduce them to I5, and Den winds up being the one who introduces I5. And Jax, of course, does that intentionally. I'm just going to read out a little bit of the interaction here. Your droid? He asked Pavan, Nick, mumbling through an mouthful. He must be really hungry, Den decided. Palp wafers tasted as bad as they sounded. Worse, in fact. Nothing could beat ready rations for sheer unpalatability, but Palp wafers came close. Not hardly, Pavan said in response to Rostu's question. It's a most singular droid, and I would say it's apparent surprise. I think you'll be surprised by I5, Nicholas, too. We continue to be. Thank you, I5 said quietly. And then of course Nick then leads them to the skimmer, and because it's only a 4-seater and there's 5 of them, Den winds up sitting in I5's lap. But as they make their way down, Labyrinth questions that, says Nick that despite his story, it doesn't really explain how he's found them, how he's found the droid. And Nick says that, well, his stomping grounds got well stomped by the Empire, so he decided to help find them, and he found him. And I5 doubts the claims and says to Jax that he thinks Nick is lying. He thinks that Nick is lying, and he thinks Nick's lying, and he says that he's sensing a raised heartbeat, etc. Sorry, just pulling my shoes over with my feet. Anyway, he senses that Nick's heartbeat is raised, and he's having a lot of emotional stress here, etc. And Jax just initially does not believe I5, and he says that he's known Nick for far longer than I5, and he asks, well, how can he trust I5? He's never met his father, he's never met I5, yet he's met Nick on a couple of occasions and knows that he can trust him. Why should he trust I5? Maybe he's programmed to lie, and I5 says that he isn't programmed to lie. And then Jax looks at Nick and then knows he's using the Force to sense whether Nick is lying, and he gets back nothing. And he says so, and I5 is confused, and then he does another reading, and he realises that Nick is kind of returning to normal now. And then just thinks, oh great, if I5's losing it, we've got, what's the final line? Well, that's just great. If I5's losing it, then we've just jumped from the reactor core into the supernova, and the air skimmer continues to blow through the night. The neon night. In this, we really see how much Jax just does not like I5 in this chapter. It's really starting to come through here. You know, we've already seen how much he dislikes I5, but it's really starting to come through here. You know, we just see how he's even just ignoring common sense. You know, Labyrinth is questioning how Nick found the droid, and he's being all obscure about certain details and vague about certain details of his story that he gave them. I5 is picking up readings that indicate that he is probably lying, and Jax is just ignoring all these obvious signs. And I5 brings up the fact that it's taking, you know, the Empire weeks to try and find Bug Eyes and Fane, but Nick just finds him, you know, just like that. And Jax is kind of purposely, I think he's just kind of being in denial just so he doesn't have to, just because I5 is really annoying him, and he just doesn't want to oblige I5. He just doesn't want to, you know, give I5. He just wants nothing to do with I5, and he just can't bring himself to really work with I5 unless there is an absolute emergency and he cannot get out of the situation without him. You know, like we saw earlier. So yeah, you really see Jax's kind of developing hatred of I5. He's starting to really get annoyed with him. You know, he was getting annoyed with him earlier, but I think this chapter is really just accentuating just how much he does not like I5. So much so that he's not listening to reason. He's not listening to, you know, the obvious. You know, it's how has Nick just found, like, it's quite obvious, like, how has Nick just found, you know, the droid like that. I'm trying to snap my fingers there, I don't think you can hear. Maybe you can. Oh, oh, that was a good one. Sorry. But Nick, you hear Nick. He's not. Jax isn't listening to reason and common sense here. It's how even if we didn't have the context, like Bond. We've had the Bond theory pretty much. We've been told that Nick is working against them. So of course we're going to be going, no, don't oblige Nick. Don't go with him. But even if we didn't, I think it would be a bit. First off, I think you can kind of understand why Jax is inclined to Nick. You can understand why. He brings up that Nick is a war hero. He's been awarded the Silver Medal of Valor. He's been on more battlefields than he can than he can remember. Nick is a respected war hero. That's something to acknowledge, but he's not listening to common sense. He's not listening at all to common sense. And you really just see how Jax is doing pretty much everything in his power to have nothing, to not let I5 have any kind of control over him, or, I think it is starting to come into he just really does not want anything to do with his family. And you can really just see how Jax is coming through. And then you have Larenth, who is, I think, a really good counterbalance to how Jax is acting a bit irrationally. She is acknowledging, she's acknowledging I5. She is respecting his capabilities. She's seeing how, he has his uses, he's effective, while Jax is just completely sidelining I5 just because he has connections to his family, and Jax wants nothing to do with that. And Jax is being irrational, while Narenth is taking it is kind of just ignoring that, because it's not really necessarily got anything to do with Jax's family. It was Lorne's dying wish for I5 to find Jax, but then what does he do? Does he serve Jax? Because that seems to be what it is, and that's all he's been doing. There's something bad. He's not been trying to do anything bad to Jax. He's just been doing what he's doing. He's just been serving Jax, and Jax is just continues to keep pushing him back, while Larenth is again the counterbalance. She's stopping I5 from, she's acknowledging I5's accomplishments. She's in favour of I5. When I5 is proving himself, she acknowledges that. You see that. So yeah. Something I keep forgetting though with Larenth is how she said that she's never smiled, and I always keep imagining, and I keep on thinking, and I thought, like, when I was picturing the scene where she compliments some I5 and how he has his uses and he keeps surprising them, I imagine Larenth with a smile, even though she's not meant to be smiling at all, probably. So that's. If she was smiling, I think it would be brought up, because that would be a significant moment based on for Larenth's character, based on what we've heard. So yeah, it's still. Also, Den sitting in I5's lap. That's the kind of comedy that we just get with them. That's so good. I think maybe one problem I've had with these chapters with Den, I5, Jackson, Larenth has probably been how we keep getting it from Den's perspective. And I would love for us to get more into Jax's head here. Like, we have got in his head in previous chapters. The difference with those was that he's not interacting with other people there. He's kind of just interacting with himself. And we haven't really had any chapters where we've been in Jax's head, but he's also been interacting with other people. It's very rare. I don't think we've had a chapter like that yet. Or maybe we have, and I don't remember, or it just didn't really have much significance. But I would love for us to have a chapter where we're in Jax's head, we're seeing it from his perspective, and we're seeing it how he and we're getting the full picture from Jax's perspective, rather than kind of jumping from Den to Jax, but mainly focusing on Den. I think that's something where it's for at least for Jax's character, it would be so much better if we could also get into his head and, you know, see a bit more of you know, how he's thinking in these situations. Again, we can't know. Again, we know why he isn't against. He's not against droids, but I think he's starting to see that now. I think i5 is annoying him to such a point where he is starting to just become against i5. I think he's just starting to have a problem with i5 just because of the relation to family, which again he's stated he doesn't really want to. He's not really interested in having any involvement with his family. You know, he's grateful that they noticed that they noticed he had the potential to be a Jedi and gave him that life, but he doesn't really have anything else he wants from them. He just wants to kind of be left alone. Pardon me. He just wants to be, you know, he just blah, blah, blah. He just wants to be, you know, left alone and we're what am I trying to say? You know, he's happy just not having any ties to his family anymore. The Jedi are his family, you know, and then you have this story that drops a bombshell, and you know it is really, and you can understand it why Jax is finding it really hard to believe. You know, he's never met his parents, and then all of a sudden this story comes out of nowhere, says, "Hello, your father sent me." So you can understand why Jax is still a bit shaken and a bit suspicious, but I think he's just taking it so far now, you know, to the point where he is ignoring reason. And i5, you know, he's been helping Jax, so what, you know, why would he be lying at this point, you know? It's really interesting, really interesting. I think I want to read the next chapter, and it looks like we are starting to pick back up with Rahinian, which I am so looking forward to. You know, I'm really been looking forward to his next see how his story continues as well. I think he's probably been the third best character in the book behind Den and i5. Or maybe Caird's been the third best. I really don't know. I think Rahinian and Caird are both equally as good. So yeah. Anyway, I'm probably going to read that chapter now. So thank you all for watching, and goodbye. Hello, I've just read chapter 31 of Coruscant Nights, Jedi Twilight, and yes, I did read it immediately after the previous chapter. I thought I was on 32 for some reason. I thought I was on 32, but I'm not. Actually, when does part 2 start? I did check, I think it's 36, isn't it? Check the ebook. Coruscant Nights. It's just easier to check the ebook because unlike the actual physical copy, it has it tells you all the chapters. So I'm just going to quickly check the ebook. Go to the free sample. So I haven't got the ebook. I have the physical copy. So yeah, there we go. Free sample. The free sample is loading. I should probably just cut this bit. I should probably just pause the recording and look at this. I'm probably not going to. It's loading. It's loading. I suppose if it takes a while to load. Everything's been a bit slow. But anyway, we pick up with while I wait for it to load. We pick up with Rahinium, and and of course he was summoned by Vader, and Vader asks how everything's going. And has Nick found Jax? And Rahinian says that he believes he has. Can't open this book. Try again later. Oh, anyway, Rahinian says I'll just check it later. I've got to know. Hold on, I've got to pause. I can't. Yeah, it is 36. Okay, that was quicker to just flick through the book then. Anyway, Rahinian replies that he believes Nick has found Jax, but he hasn't got the signal yet. And Vader says that when he gets the signal, I think he said to send troopers. He says once the signal is sent, dispatch enough troopers to take Jax alive and to not disappoint him. And and those words just resonate with him, reverberate in Rahinian's mind. Do not disappoint him. And once he's back in his office, the words just keep resonating with Rahinian. And he's just absolutely terrified. Once he's back in his office, he starts getting a rash on the back of his neck from the fear. We're told that he's on the verge of having something to do with his veins. A vascularity. And we're told that he's much too young to have such a thing. He's only 89 years old, 89 standard years old. Standard years is just human, it's just Earth years, so he's just 89 years old, which implies that that's young for an Aloman. I don't know how long Aloman live for, but and we're told that Vader's been able to dethrone the rest of the galaxy from the most terrifying thing out there. That's now in the second place, and that Vader's the first place on the two-pedestal pantheon of evil that Rahinian has. And he thinks he just has to get out of Coruscant. He can't survive like this. He's slowly being killed by the fear of Darth Vader killing him. And he just thinks he has to get out of Coruscant. He just doesn't know how, because he doesn't have the money. Because he has some money, but he doesn't have enough to take him over halfway across the galaxy, which is the amount of distance he needs to go over to actually feel safe, and he just doesn't have that money. And he winds up looking out his transparent steel, which is just a window on wall, and he sees a freighter landing and a ship flying away, and he just thinks that he'll somehow have to find a way to leave Coruscant. And that's where we leave. That's where we end that chapter, that part of the chapter. And then we pick back up with Jax, who's musing on his life as a Jedi. And we're told that, and we're told that living within the Force is something that he's just always struggled with. And that there must have been a flaw within him that just stops him from being able to do that. And I5 notices that he's stressed, and he asks why, and Jax says, why? Well, most of the Jedi Order's gone, and now Vader's specifically looking for him, so aside from that, no other reason. And I5 notes that he's inherited his father's sarcasm. And that's when Jax asks if he ordered I5 to jump out of the skimmer, what would happen? And I5 says he doesn't know. And Jax says it's tempting to test it out. And I5 says that he doubts it would work, because his programming is capable of nuance. Because he has no creativity dampeners or inhibition software. And Jax says, whose bright idea was that? And I5 says that it was Lord Pavin's idea, and as time's gone on, and then Durs also helped him get rid of some of those stuff. And that's when Jax says, does that mean you're self-aware? And I5 says that's a question he's often wondered himself. But with the assistance of friends, and including Barry Sophie, he's been able to come to the conclusion that he probably is, because he thinks, therefore, he is. If he's able to think so, if he's able to think that if he's able to... I'll just figure this out. Again, I5 was pensive. It's a question I've asked myself often. I must admit that at times I was reluctant to follow to its logical conclusion, but eventually, with the help of friends, including Jedi, I might add, I came to realise that the ability to ponder the subject it indicates a positive response in and of itself. In other words, I am because I think. Which kind of reminds me of the IG-88 story that I did read this story, but I never did a video review on it. Therefore I am the tale of IG-88, and the quotes that story's named after. I think, therefore I am. That's what it reminds me of. Anyway, Nick overhears the conversation, and he asks if so does that mean you're not subject to the operating constraints of other droids? And I5 says that's precisely, and that I program myself to an extent, much more of an extent than other droids, certainly, although there are other droids in the galaxy like me to greater or lesser degrees. And this isn't welcome news to Jax. And Lavin says that he sounds certain that there are other droids like him, and he asks if he's encountered any. And I5 recalls an encounter, and they're not explicitly said, but you can just tell that they are, and I checked Wikipedia, and they do list it as an indirect mention. And he pretty much brings up C-3PO and R2-D2 as a answer. And that, he said the protocol unit seemed to have made a bond with an astromech, so, that's definitely C-3PO and R2. And he says that the protocol seems to be a bit whiny. And we're told that Jax didn't really consider himself narrow-minded, and as a Jedi they were told to keep an open mind, and they were told to be treat all sentience equally, deal with justice equally. But you just can't see how sentience applies to walking circuitry, a machine. And he says that there's nothing but stopping him from having the droids from having I5 reprogrammed or its sense or having its memory wiped, but yet gets the feeling Zender wasn't like that. I'm actually just going to read this bit out because it's quite interesting. Of course, nothing was preventing him from having its memory wiped and reprogrammed, although he had a feeling that I5 might resist that, which was a pretty unsettling thought in itself, and it wouldn't go over well with the droid's buddy, the Celestin either. In fact, judging by Lawrence and Nick's interest, Jax's viewpoint, the only sane one, was rapidly becoming unpopular. It wasn't right. In fact, it seemed very much to Jax a perversion of the way the universe ought to be run. If this was a galaxy in which droids could think and feel and everything else went along with that, well, it was downright scary. And we're told about how he would use, sometimes in situations like this, he'd use the Force to try and cleanse himself of these these confused and overwhelming feelings, but he can't even do that because Vader could find him. And then we told about how the Jedi have been accused of him kind of just being asleep during the Clone Wars, and he notes that the Jedi kind of fell from the greatness in the past. And he winds up getting cut off when Nick arrives, and they see a office ahead, and they start sensing something, and Nam says he sensed that to Jax, and Jax acknowledges that, and they start making their way toward and they can't be sure if it is Bug Eyes, there's something indicating it, but anyway, they make their way toward the office, and Dane starts coming, and Jax just says, "You're not a Jedi, why are you coming?" And, pardon me, Dane says that he's a reporter as much as he hates to remember it at times. That's where we end the chapter. Rahinian, you know, you really just see how he's crumbling to bits serving Vader, and the thing is, I know he dies at some point. I've seen his Wikipedia article. I don't know when he dies. I don't know what book he dies in. I know he dies. Uh, and then you have then with Jax. But I mean, just keep on topic of Rahinian right now. But with Rahinian, you understand how he's just crumbling, and he has to find a way out. He's trying to find a way out. It's kind of funny that now Cairds and not I5, Cairds and Rahinian are now kind of sharing, um, plot lines, just trying to escape what they're in now. They're basically just sharing plot lines, but yeah, it's interesting. Now with Jax, you really just see how much his hatred of I5 is coming out now. And especially with that little remark, the only sane one, surrounding his opinion. Everyone's being a bit more open-minded to I5, and they're finding him quite an interesting subject, and Jax, he doesn't like the fact that something that to him is just supposed to be a machine is now sentient. It's scary to him, as it says. It's scary to him. It doesn't, and not only that, it's connected to his family, which he doesn't want. It's it's pretty much I5 is pretty much the epitome of everything Jax doesn't like in the draw, doesn't want or like, and you see how that's really just affecting his thoughts. How he really just wants to get rid of I5, etc. I don't really have much else to say on it because it is. Otherwise, I'll just be repeating what I was saying last chapter, But you really just see how Jax is at a hate. I think it really is starting to develop into a hatred of I5 now. Um, so yeah, you really just see that coming through, and yeah, I bet that it's only going to be at the end of the third book that he'll start warming up to I5. Um, so yeah. Uh, I get that was a really interesting thing though when it said that his opinion was the only sane one. That's very much coming from Jax's. That's very much set in Jax's mind. We sort of get. I saw a chapter about has a conversation and we see it from Jax's perspective. We got that, hooray! Um, and again, it's very interesting how we already kind of know how he felt about I5, but getting further details about just how much I5 frustrates him is it's again very interesting how much Jax just despises I5 because again it's just the epitome of everything he doesn't really like. To him, droids should be just machines, and you know it's really you really just see how it's really frustrating him. And again, it's just that one line that keeps getting me though. The only sane one in reference to his opinion and how it was quickly becoming unpopular. He thinks he's got the only right opinion here, and you see how he's being very un-Jedi-like in this. He's been very un-Jedi-like, and you really it's starting to be it's getting quite interesting. I mean, and it does show a bit more of his character coming through. So it's again, it's just all quite interesting. I don't really have anything else to say on this chapter. Otherwise, pardon me, I'll just be repeating what I was saying last chapter about how Jax's thoughts in I5. So yeah. But this chapter definitely gave some good insight into how Jax thinks about I5. And I kind of read out some of the more key bits of that, so yeah. But anyway, thank you all for watching, and goodbye.